Send Barron calls emerge in the US to send Trump's son to war against Iran. We will talk about this and not only with Oleksandr Kraiev, expert at Ukrainian Prism think tank, senior lecturer at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Oleksandr, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Hello, nice to connect to you.
Oleksandr, Bild reports that calls have emerged in the United States to send Barron Trump, the 19-year-old son of Donald Trump, to the army. A social media campaign appeared after statements about the possible prolonged military operation against Iran. Opponents of the war are posting memes and AI-generated images of Barron in military uniform, writing, "Send your son to the front to understand the price of war." Could this campaign influence public attitudes toward? Is there any evidence that public support for Donald Trump is declining amid rising tensions in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, we should mention that Barron is not the newcomer to the meme world. So basically, it's not the first time he was under direct attack of the internet trolls and because, for example, when Donald Trump was dealing with Finland issues, when he was trying to acquire these islands, we see a lot of memes being posted that Barron Trump should marry the crown princess of Denmark in order to receive Greenland as a land and basically to become the member of the royal family and inherit the island together with the Danish throne sometime after that, and just to enlarge the American empire in that way. Apart from that, we also saw Barron Trump being the target for the campaign against migration laws in the United States. For example, why is Barron not in ICE? He should also work for everything that Donald is doing in that regard. So basically, he is considered to be the future president and the future boss, as it says in the internet, of the United States. Either we can comprehend this as a joke, or we can just throw off these ideas just another internet meme trolling. But one way or another, Barron Trump is not a newcomer to this world of internet jesting and jokes. So that's a very good and very, I should say, very ground continuation of this trend. But whatever they be with Barron, we do see that the idea of the full-fledged military operation, including boots on the ground, including land troops in Iran, does not have the support of the American population. Even more, we do see that Americans do not support the current state of affairs with Iran. They do not support the attacks against infrastructure. They do not support the attacks, both sea attacks and aerial attacks by Israel and America against Iran, and especially after the Tomahawk missile, or allegedly Tomahawk missile, strike an Iranian school, killing several hundred people. We do see that the support is still declining. So that's not the question of the land operation, not the question of the fledged engagement of the American military person on the ground. Is just the idea that this whole Iran operation, as of now, it still hadn't get the foothold in American public opinion, and this operation is still very, very much unpopular and still damaging both Trump's image and ratings and his co-workers in the Republican Party.
Yes, we understand that the campaign calling for Barron Trump to be sent to the army reflects growing frustration among opponents of not potential military operation against Iran, but targeting the son of Trump. Activists are trying to highlight what they see as the personal cost of war and the distance between political decisions and the people who would actually fight. Dear viewers, please share your thoughts in the comments. And Axios reports that the United States is dissatisfied with Israel's strikes on Iranian fuel infrastructure. According to the outlet sources, Washington knew about the planned attacks but did not expect them to be on such a scale. On Saturday, Israel struck 30 fuel storage facilities. What do you think about this, and what specific concerns does the United States have regarding Israel's strikes on Iranian fuel infrastructure?
The main idea here, as I see it, is just the political games of Donald Trump in this election year, because he promised the Americans that the prices for gas and the prices for common goods and for food will not increase because of this operation. He claimed that quite the contrary, that the prices will go down because of his ventures activities in the Middle East, and that he will do anything possible in order to provide for Americans a more inclusive economy and a more adjustable price for the common goods. But at the same time, we do see that the gas prices are rising, that oil prices are staggering high. They are at the highest point since the start of the Russian full-fledged invasion into Ukraine. So unfortunately, his promises did not come to be real. And with Israeli strikes against oil industry in Iran, which was not, by the way, considered by the United States military, we do see that the prices will rise even more. This exact morning, the prices hit the record $112 per barrel of crude oil. So basically, it is mostly an political issue. It is his communication with his possible voters and with the voters of the Republican Party. And basically, Israel, as of now, they definitely did strike the targets, because oil industry is something supporting the military and industrial complex of the Ayatollah regime. And we do understand that oil is the main source of income for the Iranian regime. So in that case, Israelis are striking the legitimate targets for the military, as well as for example, for Ukrainians, Russian oil tankers and oil refineries are as well a legitimate target. But for the Americans, and especially for the White House, striking more oil is degrading the possibility of Trump getting more electoral points from this campaign. So I don't see anything apart from internal politics and the political games of Trump himself in it.
The Wall Street Journal reports that Europe could again begin purchasing Russian gas and oil on a large scale due to Trump's conflict with Iran, which would be a serious blow for us, for Ukraine. Officials in the European Union fear that a prolonged closure of the Persian Gulf could force reconsideration of the bloc's tough stance on energy cooperation with Russia. Is Europe sufficiently prepared for long-term energy disruptions? What is the situation?
Unfortunately, we see that Russians are already trying to blackmail Europe into going by this scenario, because Putin have already claimed that he will seize any economic and especially oil and gas activity and contracts with the European states starting next month. So basically, they're trying to show the European leaders that they have no other choice but to bend to Russian demands and to reinstate some of the contracts, and also to lift some of the sanctions, because that's not only the issue of like willingness to participate in this trade, it's also an issue of the political decision to start the sanction wavering and start to lift some of the sanctions which were imposed on the Russian Federation as a result of its aggression against Ukraine in 2022. So Russians are already playing out this scenario. As for Europeans, they have basically two options, as always. They can, of course, bend to Russian demands. They can get cheaper oil, but at a higher political price, because they will certainly have more provocations on the side of Russia. And I do not mean only attacks against Ukraine or Ukrainian infrastructure or more intense attack on the front lines. I also put into this the possible drone fly-ins by the Russian Federation into the European airspace. I also mean some provocations involving Russian fighter jets, for example, in the Baltics or somewhere else. So at the moment when Europeans will consider re-establishing trade with Russia, Russia will perceive Europe as a weakling in this situation. And Russia will use this weakness of Europeans to their own advancement. And for example, we will once again see the possible tries of Russia to reinstate the legal procedure against the so-called sabotage of Nord Stream 2. Or, for example, we also heard from Russian speakers that possibly Ukraine is trying to destroy the Southern Strait and the Russian oil and gas pipelines in the Black Sea. So basically, Russians will also put pressure on us, and they will also put pressure on the European legal system. So this way, of course, it is cheaper for Europeans, once again, to get on with the Russian Federation, but it will cost them much, much more geopolitically, and it will once again degrade the European position, not only within the negotiations, but generally speaking within foreign policy as it is. But there is always a second option, and the second option lies within closer cooperation with, for example, Japanese companies or with Norwegian oil and gas companies. It lies within the cooperation with the Gulf states and the OPEC countries, which are currently trying to decouple themselves from the Iranian regime, and they're trying to get more from their own refineries and to get more from their own markets. So basically, Europeans have some sufficient second-hand scenarios. They have some additional sources where they can get their resources, where they can get their oil and gas. And by the way, even the United States, Trump has stated numerous times that he wants to reestablish all the contracts for liquefied natural gas with the European countries, for example, Poland, Lithuania, Germany, the United Kingdom of Great Britain. So they have always another options. Even the American options is still available. So it's only for them to decide whether they are ready to trade their freedom and their foreign policy for cheaper gas from Russia, or they are ready to sacrifice some the money. They do have the money to sacrifice in order to get better and more secure and better contracts from other states such as Japan, Norway, OPEC countries, or the United States.
Earlier, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that Washington may partially ease sanctions on Russian oil. This option is being considered to stabilize the global market amid the military operation against Iran. The U.S. administration is currently trying to balance the need to contain aggressors with preventing an energy collapse. Might this policy create long-term strategic risks?
It will definitely create such risk because it will never stop there. Basically, if you are to lift some of the sanctions from the Russian Federations, you'll definitely have a lot of pro-Russian or distinctively Russian lobbyists working on the issue of just lifting the whole sanction regime from Russian Federation, because business as usual is always a valuable option for a lot of businesses in the West, especially in the States, where, as we see, a lot of pro-Trump businesses are vouching to lift this sanction from Russia. So unfortunately, it will not stop just on the oil sanctions, because with this lifting of oil sanctions, Kirill Dmitriev again will reinstate his plans for $12 trillion plan of common business ventures with the United States. He will claim that additional sanctions, especially on technological interchange, especially on visas, especially on common financial markets, should be lifted. So Russia will gain an upper hand, not only in the negotiation process, but generally speaking, against the Western powers. So any easing of sanction regime against Russian Federation will definitely bring more problems, more political, geopolitical, strategically speaking, just a crisis in the country of Russian aggression as it is.
And Fox News reports that Donald Trump is dissatisfied with the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of Ali Khamenei, as Iran's new supreme leader. Earlier, the U.S. president said he opposed Mojtaba coming to power and intended to personally participate in selecting the country's new leader. Why does this situation risk further escalating tensions, in your opinion?
Well, because basically Trump will once again try to destroy Iranian leadership. As he said himself, he has some additional variants, some options who may stand instead of Khamenei, instead of the last Ayatollah. But then he said that, oopsie daisy, we destroyed them all in our rocket barrage. So basically Trump was very reckless with his options. Trump was just destroying the whole power infrastructure of Iran, the whole power vertical of the Ayatollah regime, and now he faces the consequences. The regime is trying to present itself as even stronger because the lack of political leadership demands cohesion and demands unity within Iran. Even those who were ready to support the United States or those who were ready to work with the American administration are currently gathering around new Ayatollah, and they're trying to just preserve the regime because they want to preserve Iran as a country, as a nation. And so with such barrages and with such reckless behavior towards the political communication with the Iranians, Trump basically provided more propaganda ammunition and provided more propaganda options for the Ayatollah regime itself.
And the New York Times writes that, yes, President Donald Trump's war against Iran is drawing comparisons to the invasion of Ukraine by Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said last Monday, we did not start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it. A similar language was used by Putin at the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. At the time, he said, we did not start the so-called war in Ukraine. On the contrary, we're trying to end it. Experts note that both leaders sought to avoid using the word war. When asked whether it was in fact a war, yes, House Speaker Mike Johnson replied, I think it is an operation. A similar statement was made by senior Russian State Duma official Vyacheslav Volodin, who said this is a special military operation. If Russia had launched a full-scale war, it would have ended long ago. Is it appropriate to draw such comparisons between these situations? How do you think?
Well, if we speak about the Russian approach to the so-called special military operations, that's definitely more of a propaganda type of thing, because for Putin, there is no regard to his constitution. He shouldn't have any regard for his people. He shouldn't have any regard for some democratic processes, for example, for his parliament or for his Senate or for anything. He can say whatever he wants. So it's just part of his propaganda type of Orwellian propaganda, when the words does not mean the things they definitely mean. But for Trump, it is mostly a legal instrument, because you see, the presidents of the United States to a very big extent framed within their own powers. And the president of the United States, according to American legislation, he cannot use American armed forces abroad within 60 days if it is a war situation. So possibly just to make his retreat from any legal issues a safe passage, Trump decided not to use the word war in this regard in order to circumvent the Senate and, generally speaking, the Congress limitations to his powers, in order not to get a new impeachment, for example, or in order not to get a new internal investigation from the parliamentarian committees of the United States Congress. So for Trump, it's mostly an ethical thing, not a propaganda one. But for Putin, it is purely propaganda type of stuff. But by the way, I should also point out that it didn't work for Trump as well, because at the same time when Pete Hegseth was saying only about specific military actions against Iranian regime, when Marco Rubio was saying about short timing operation using the American military, when everybody else in the Republican Party got these messages not to say war within their comments of the current situation, Trump is constantly calling this thing war. Trump is constantly saying, yeah, we started the war. Yeah, this is war against Ayatollah regime. Yeah, we will win this war. So basically, Trump is working against himself in that regard. And although the strategy was a good one, judicially speaking, legislatively speaking, we do see that Trump does not adhere to his own strategy.
Oleksandr, I see that according to Israeli Channel 12, Witkoff and Kushner canceled visit to Israel. Earlier media outlets reported that, yes, negotiators were planning to arrive in Tel Aviv on March 10th for a meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Could this cancellation maybe signal tensions or disagreements between the US and Israel once again? And what do you think about this?
Well, we do see that Israel is trying to get as much from this situation as possible. And as we spoke with you earlier about the strikes against oil refineries in Iran, we do see that that was the decision of Jerusalem only. It was not fully agreed upon with the United States Army, and it was not fully agreed upon politically with the White House. Same goes, for example, for their operation in Lebanon with the defense forces of Israel conducting a full-fledged land operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon, we do see that the Americans have their own reservations against such developments in this conflict, in this war. But at the same time, Israel does not give a damn about these limitations. They do understand that Hezbollah still presents a vital threat to the state of Israel, to Israelis, and they want to destroy this threat as they destroyed Hamas previously. So basically, the main problem for the Americans here is that they do see Israel as an indispensable ally, but at the same time as a very independent ally who have their own agenda, they have their own national interest in mind, and they act upon their national interest, disregarding the political limitations that the White House is putting upon them.
And Oleksandr, Donald Trump stated that the decision on when to end the war against Iran will be made together with Israel. Once again, this was stated by Donald Trump, reports the Times of Israel. Do you not rule out making a unilateral decision to end the strikes, for example, and what conditions could serve as the basis for ending the military campaign against Iran?
There are a lot of such conditions. Basically, with Trump and his team not being sure on what was the prerequisites for starting the strikes, we have a plethora of combinations and options what may be the circumstances for ending the strikes. Because previously we heard from Trump himself, from Hexet, from Rubio, that the strikes are merely militarily inspired. So to say, they are trying to destroy the capabilities of Iranian regime to strikes against the Americans themselves, to strike against the American military bases in the region, or to strike against the America proper, and that is against the land targets in the United States of America. And so that was the first reason to start the whole operation. Then Trump suggested that they may change the regime in Iran, they may destroy the Ayatollah regime. And although Pete Hexet directly said that it is not the objective of the American forces for a regime change in Iran, but he also added, but the regime will definitely change. So at the same time, we also hear from Rubio that possibly a new deal on trade, a new deal on nuclear facilities, a new deal on regional stability may also be the final point of the whole election. So basically, as of now, we have three different scenarios on how the United States may end its own operation against Iran. But all these scenarios are kind of strategic ones. They are far-reaching, and unfortunately, we do see that within a or two, the United States cannot achieve the necessary level of destruction and the necessary level of aggression in order to press Iran into getting into some kind of the negotiation condition. That is why, for example, at the end of the last week, Donald Trump suggested that only unconditional surrender one will be the final point of this operation. So now we have also the fourth possible scenario of the end game in Iran operation. So yeah, the Americans definitely can stop at any moment. They can proclaim victory at any case. They can say that they destroyed all the rocket facilities, all the nuclear facilities of the Iranian regime. They destroyed Iranian fleet, which is true, by the way. They destroyed their capabilities to strike American land, and they destroyed their aggressive instruments in foreign policy of Iran. But at the same time, as I said at the beginning, ever-changing prerequisites for the conflict, ever-changing casus belli for this operation provides for ever-changing endgame scenario, which is definitely not a strategy. That's mostly a talking point for Trump and his subordinates, but it's not something that can be called a strategic approach to foreign policy, especially for foreign military operations.
And let's talk about Ukraine. A new round of negotiations could take place this week. The talks must involve the United States. President Volodymyr Zelensky said in an interview with the New York Times. According to the president, the previous round of negotiations, which was scheduled to take place in the UAE last Friday, was postponed due to his official visit to the front line. Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine considers the presence of the American side at the negotiating table essential. What is your expectations?
Well, unfortunately, I do not see any possibility to reinstate the negotiation process before any, I don't know, pause or any end to hostilities in the East will be in place. Because basically, the Americans are not in a position to diverge themselves into the second front, into the diplomatic front to the Russian aggression. And at the same time, without some decisive result with Iranian operations, the Americans will not be in a position to push on Russia more ferociously and more sincerely. By the way, at the same time, I do see Trump suggesting that it's Russia who is ready for a substantial negotiation, not Ukraine. From his remarks, it appears that Ukraine wants the continuation of the war. It is Ukraine who wants to get more weapons and get a protracted military conflict. So unfortunately, I do not see, politically speaking, diplomatically, any possibility for direct diplomatic talks on Russian aggression before the end of the Iranian hostilities, both because it's not possible for the Americans to have Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff at two places at the same time, speaking about Iran and speaking about Moscow aggression. And secondly, as I have already stated, I do see some misunderstanding, let's put it that way, within Trump's team and even within Trump's head as it is. So we do see some contradictive narratives when it comes to Iran and Russia. We see a lot of contradiction and a lot of attempts on Trump's side to downplay Russian engagement with Iran and just to not to mention the Russian help and Russian intelligence being provided to Iran to fight the Americans in this war. So basically, before the end of hostilities in the Middle East, there will be no substantial negotiations on Ukraine.
Oleksandr, we're waiting for updates on the negotiations and keeping an eye on events around the world. Oleksandr, thank you for helping to sort this out. Thank you for this important and interesting conversation as always. Oleksandr Kraiev, expert at Ukrainian Prism, a think tank and the electorate at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, was with us today. We wish you all the best. Please share this interview and continue supporting Ukraine. Thank you so much and see you.
Thank you for having me.